Welcome back. In this clip, I wanted to bring together the material we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks. This is so that you can continue on to write your proposal. The proposal is a key step in your research project because it represents that stage of a project where you would normally have to seek approval to continue to spend money or to spend resources, or to actually go out and seek additional resources in order to continue your project. So it's an important stage of any engineering project. So just to recap, let's think of the things that we've been talking about in recent times. First of all, it's important that you understand the context of the project and that you can convey the context of that project to your readers or funders for the project. So in that context, we talked about the idea of a route definition for the project, the PQR nomenclature, and also a list of who are the stakeholders of the project using the 2 cages acronym. If these things don't mean anything to you, then it's time to go back and look at some of the earlier clips which discuss these. Having established the context of the project, it's important then to hone in on what is the knowledge base for your project. And so we talked about the literature review stage of your project, and the things that are interested here are the directly related prior literature. These are things that impinge directly and have investigated specifically in the area that you're investigating. There is also the broader prior literature to do with the subject, which feeds back into the context. Then you might seek analogies from other disciplines. It may be that another discipline has approached a similar problem, but uses quite a different language or mathematical framework for investigation. So if there are analogies from other disciplines, this might inform your research. Don't forget there are fundamental principles and laws that one should not violate. Make sure that water always flows downhill under gravity and so forth, because simple errors with regard to things like conservation of energy, conservation of mass, are things that will kill your proposal before it gets started. And of course, you should have identified some gaps to be filled. Those gaps might be in terms of the depth of understanding in a particular topic area, the granularity of understanding, whether there's just a coarse knowledge of what's going on, or whether there's very fine-grained knowledge which you're hoping to improve, and also the overall breadth of knowledge that you're seeking to fill by your project. At the end of the ascertaining the knowledge, you should have established some research questions that will be investigated by your methodology. Keep in mind that there are a limited number of possible methodologies and that you should establish why you have chosen a particular methodology in order to approach the problem that you want to investigate. Having chosen a methodology, one then needs to document a method of collecting the data and analysing the data. So whether this be an experiment, a survey, whether it's statistical analysis, numerical analysis, these need to be documented in some detail because this is where the resources required to run the project will actually be spent. So let's think about the resources that you might need. It's possible that you might need some physical resources, such as experimental material. You might need some resources to travel to a field site. You might want a tank of petrol. So these are examples of physical resources that you could need to run your project. You may also require some lab space from the university. Lab space is at a premium, and so you need to be careful to specify how much space you think you might need and over what period you'll need it, and when are the likely starting and ending dates. Do you also need technical assistance? There are options available to provide a limited amount of technical assistance from university technicians. On the other hand, there are also training courses available so that you can learn how to use hand tools, for example, in the workshop, and therefore get access to perhaps build some experimental rig of your own. Finally, the resources might include data or computational power. So, for example, you might need data from the Bureau of Meteorology or Geoscience Australia in order to do your project. All of these things take time to organise, and so you should be planning well ahead so that you can establish the availability of these. You should be talking to your supervisor about whether these items are likely to be available or not. And then finally, depending on the project, you might need some specific approvals before you can conduct your project. If you are doing a survey of some sort, then it's likely that you will need ethics approval. If you are working in a laboratory, you'll need to do some OH&S training in order to get access to the laboratory. If you're working with a company, you might need to sign a confidentiality agreement with that company in order to get access to data. And if you want access to a lab, then you need to ensure that you have approval to work in the lab, that you've done the OH&S, that you've agreed on what space can be accessed and when, and so forth. So those are all things that need to be in place in order to do your project. In this slide, I'm just showing the typical page lengths in your proposal and final report for your project. So there is a typical section. Now, your sections may not be labelled exactly as these, but these are typical sections in research papers. And there is a column for the final report page length, a column for the proposal report page length, and some comments. So you're going to need a title and an abstract, and that might be at least 200 words for your abstract to get across the idea adequately. Then there'll be some introduction and background or context of your project. This will contain the root definition, and for your final report and initial report, these might be identical. You will then have a literature review and draw a conclusion from the literature review. Now, thinking about the overall length of the report of around 15 pages, you probably don't want to spend more than about a third of the length of the entire report on the literature review, because the literature review is largely about what other people have done, where we're actually more interested in what you have done on the project. So once again, the literature review for the final report and the proposal report might be very much the same, with just some updating of the literature or correcting based on feedback on the proposal report. The method and the methodology section of the proposal report is likely to be somewhat longer than it will be in the final report. This is because in the proposal report, you are trying to convince someone that the method that you are putting forward is likely to answer the research questions. On the other hand, in the final report, you actually have proof as to whether or not the method has answered the research questions, and so it might be somewhat briefer in the final report. Eventually, you will, in your final report, write about your experiment and results and data acquisition, and a discussion and conclusion that will take up the balance of your report. So that gives you some idea of what you're heading for, and hopefully now you will be able to proceed and make a plan of what the various sections in your report will be, and even what the content of the various paragraphs in your report should be. I would just suggest that you do this before you start doing too much detailed writing, so that you can be judicious in how you select material to go into your reports. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.